hug each other that he had turned the hangers around. Recognize excellence in others. 2, reward it on the spot. 3, report on it. What I'm doing with you. I went to my audience and I reported it, and it happened to be a dental audience, and some individual said, hey, you know, when we have new patients come in, we have a new patient form. What if I put the new patient form on a clipboard with a pen and turned it around and handed it to them with the pen? Would that make them feel better? Absolutely! What a tiny adaptation. You could say, well, the dry cleaner does that. Why couldn't I do something similar to make my patients or my customers feel that much more welcome? Recognize excellence in others. Reward it in them and report it to those around you and see how you can incorporate it into your own business. Power talkers are people who give credit where due. When they notice things going right, they notice it and they decide to do something about it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to find out, are any people here people who have private pilot's licenses? Anybody ever take flying lessons? Okay, good. Quite a few of you. I'm also a pilot. And I want to tell you about a flight experience I had on June 16, 1996. I kept a Cessna 182 at a small airport in Seattle, and it happened that this is the airport where Boeing builds all 737s and 757s. It's the Renton airfield. And I kept my airplane there, and on that particular day, I went flying with 2 people I had not met before, because I had made a donation to a charity auction, the Starlight Foundation, AIDS critically ill kids. And you know, the auctioneer says, and your pilot will take you and a guest sightseeing in the San Juan Islands, which is in the far northwest part of our country. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful part. It's near Seattle. It's very close to Victoria, British Columbia, just a cluster of lovely islands. And so that particular day, I went to the airport, I walked across the tarmac, and walking toward me was a guy, mid-50s, gray mustache, gray hair, a real twinkle in his eye. He was obviously excited about going flying. His name was Pete Buck, and I welcomed Pete aboard. Pete was an attorney in Seattle, and he had been the winning bidder. In fact, a very persistent bidder, because no matter what anybody else bid, Pete always outbid them. He wanted that flight. With him was his fiancée, Jean. Jean was a dentist, and Jean looked about the way you look if you're walking into her office for a root canal. You could see she did not like this whole idea of going in a small plane. So I welcomed them. I got them seated in their side of the plane. I came around, walked around the prop, and got into. Pilot's always sitting here, and I thought, well, Jean looks a little nervous, so I'll lighten things up. Now, as a pilot, you always give a safety briefing to your passengers, whether you're commercial or private. And I said, now, Jean, if at any point I should slump forward and stop breathing, don't worry, Pete can just press this red button and say, help, the pilot's dead! And someone will talk you down. Pete will land the plane. It'll be okay. Now, and Pete, should we land prematurely, you'll want to raise this lever so you can pop that door open and get out of the plane. But it was a perfectly beautiful day. We took off from Renton, and Jean thought that we were going to go sightseeing. But Pete had a secret plan, because June 16th was the day they had met 1 year earlier, and they had met on this little island, San Juan Island, and specifically at a yacht harbor called the Roche Harbor Resort that had a little airstrip beside it. So he thought his surprise was, for their anniversary, he'd have me fly to the place, as he put it in legal parlance, the scene of the crime, where they had met. I thought this was a wonderful plan. So we took off, perfect flying conditions, reached cruising altitude. I flicked on the automatic pilot. We're flying along, and it was spectacular. Jean, if you look over your right shoulder there, that's Mount Rainier behind you, over 14,000 feet. Pete, look, up ahead there, that's Mount Baker. These two mountains have more glaciers on them than any other mountainous area in North America outside of Alaska. It was fantastic, sparkling, beautiful weather. As we approached Roche Harbor, I went through my pre-landing checklist, fuel mixture 10%, flaps 10, checked everything, all's well, flicked off my autopilot. And I heard a voice. Don't land there. Who's that? Who's that? What's that? And I looked, Pete and Jean didn't seem to have heard this voice. And I thought, well, that's kind of creepy. And I checked my gauges, everything was just fine. I felt fine. I thought, I'm not the kind of guy who, my life is not ruled by voices. And so I did what you pilots know. I made my turn to left base and then my turn to final. the last thing before landing. And as I made my turn to final, I heard again, "Don't land there." I thought, God, I've never had that happen before. That's weird. I thought, well, maybe I should change and go to another airstrip. How would I explain that? Pete, don't worry, I feel fine. As you can see, the instruments are all in the green, the weather's perfect, everything's okay. I want to let you know, I'm hearing voices. You don't like your pilot from the cockpit today. Ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching Detroit Airport. I'm hearing voices in the cockpit. I think we'll go to Minneapolis. So I decided to continue with the landing, and we were on short final, which is just before you actually touch down, before the threshold of the runway. In fact, the beginning of the runway was about as far as from here to the back of the auditorium. And at that moment, we encountered a phenomenon that the pilots in the room know about, and which you encounter yourself without knowing about it, and that's called wind shear. Wind shear is a vertical wind. You can't see it, you can't do anything about it. And in fact, you encounter wind shear all the time as you're flying, because you're going along at 33,000 feet and suddenly your coffee jiggles a little bit. Well, that's wind shear. The plane may be bumped down 50 feet. You're at 33,000 feet, no big deal. But we were at 33 feet. And when you go down 50 feet from 33 feet, it's a big deal. And suddenly, it's like an elevator, the cable is cut or something. Suddenly, the plane's on the ground, and while you're flying, you're steering with the yoke. But when you're on the ground, the yoke does nothing. You steer with your feet. And I'm struggling with the foot pedals to keep the plane going straight because I can see the end of the runway there. We're going to make it. If I can just keep it going straight, and we're bouncing along over the little bumps, and there's grass sticking. And I can tell you, the weirdest thing in emergency situations, I had these three predominant thoughts in my mind. For some reason, I was thinking, first, I was like, oh, fine, I'm going to get grass stains all over my plane now. And then, of course, I also thought, why didn't I listen to that voice? And third, I thought, and why did the winning bidder have to be a lawyer? I do not want an attorney on my plane when I'm crashing. Still, I was able to keep the plane straight. We were bumping along, just heading right for the runway. We were just going to... And then I saw the ditch. And the landing gear, the nose gear, dropped down into the ditch, sheared off the bottom of the plane. If you have no landing gear, you're not in control. We slid down the runway on the belly of the plane. That particular model, the Cessna 182, has its carburetor on the bottom side of the block, so that was the first thing to be sheared off. So now my 55 gallons of fuel spilled out on the runway. Sparks are flying. Well, you know what happened next. Plane came to a halt. Cockpit filled with smoke. Fortunately, Pete had listened carefully to his instructions. He opened the door and got out with Jean. We ran from the plane and stood back and watched. And when the sheriff arrived and pulled his Instamatic out of the car, that was my Cessna 182. It's all that was left of it. Total loss. Insurance company paid for it. I'm very happy to tell you, not a scratch. We didn't have a singed hair. Perfect survival. Nothing bad. But man, did I learn some lessons that day. For one, you better believe I listened to that voice. The book I'm working on now is Gut Level Leadership, and it helps males primarily. Women, you know this already. Us dumb guys think, it has to be logically verifiable to be true. No, it does not have to be logically understandable at all to be true. People who make the best decisions in business and in life are people who check with their gut. What is my gut telling me to do? I learned that lesson. I certainly learned the lesson about the big picture, like don't think about grass stains, control the plane. And I also learned something about judging others. Because I was so worried about Pete Buck, thinking, oh gosh, now we've survived the crash, but now I can just see the lawsuits. What's going to... Emotional damage, failed marriage, dry cleaning for his pants. I know it's not going to be misrepresentation because the auctioneer did say, this will be an experience you'll never forget. I know it's not that. Hey, I was so wrong. This guy, Pete Buck, is a fantastic person. He didn't sue me. He invited me to the wedding. Their wedding video begins with this picture. I was with him for 4th of July this last year. I go every year. They come to all my parties. We've become well, more than great friends. I think there's something about a life bond going on here. I was so wrong about Pete. But I also learned something about failure. Because I certainly left that experience feeling that I had failed as a pilot. You know, you're not supposed to have your plane burn up. And I'm so grateful to your hometown boy here, Henry Ford, for reminding us of what failure really means. Failure is the opportunity to begin again more intelligently. In fact, the auditorium next door where the losers are, they fail a lot less than winners fail. Because when losers fail, they step back and they say, oh, I'm never doing that again. I'm no good at that. I'll never do that again. Winners have an experience like this and say, oh, there are lessons in there that I can learn. In fact, one of the distinguishing characteristics of winners in life is that they encounter failures and recognize that in them lie the greatest lessons they can learn. And in fact, you hear it in their language because power talkers exhibit the third trait, which is that they rebound resiliently. They bounce back. Do bad things happen to successful people? Absolutely. More bad things happen to successful than unsuccessful people. Unsuccessful people encounter a bad situation dealing with collections or selling or emotional customers, and they go, oh, I'm not good at that. I better not do that. Winners encounter the same situation, and instead of saying, I failed, I'll never do that again, they say, okay, there's a lesson here. What can I learn from this experience? What shall I do differently the next time I approach such a situation? How can I extract from this great meaning that I can take forward in my career and in my personal life? Failure is what helps to shape the most successful people. Power talkers rebound resiliently. If you hear someone saying, if only I had, you know that's not a winner. The winner says, starting now, I will. Power talkers rebound resiliently. Okay, I'd like you to stand up, please. And while you're standing, would you give yourself a little neck massage here? Scalp and neck. Because here's an intellectually challenging part of the evening. Because, hey, until now, has everything I've said made sense? Yes. You know this. This is not academic. Yet, there is a scientific foundation for what we're talking about. And while you're standing for a moment, sit down whenever you'd like, but as you remain standing, I want to explain the intellectual, the scientific background. And I will particularly invite these people to sit down so we can see what's up on the screen. I want to introduce you to one of our nation's preeminent psychologists, Dr. Martin Seligman. He's written several books. They are great. I recommend them all. In particular, I'll recommend the book Learned Optimism by Dr. Martin Seligman. Fantastic person. Here's Dr. Seligman's approach. It's called cognitive restructuring. And in fact, okay, how many of you are clinically depressed? Okay, of course you wouldn't admit it. There are two very effective treatments for depression. One is a pharmaceutical approach, and drugs really work well with depressed people. So long as they take the drugs. They stop taking the drugs, they're depressed again. Cognitive restructuring is different. Cognitive restructuring does not involve any drugs at all. It involves a counselor helping you to redefine the way you view the experiences that have happened to you in life. It works wonders because you don't need to take drugs, and it has a much more persistent, a much more lasting effect. Here's the way it works. An individual, you and I and the people next door, all have an explanatory style. That is, a habitual way of speaking, a way of describing what goes on. And there are three measures of your explanatory style. The first has to do with what I'll call the first P, pervasiveness. Global and local are the two extremes. So, for example, in my plane crash, I could say, oh, everything's going wrong for me. I crashed the plane, I'm in bad health, my family's falling apart, I'm experiencing financial difficulties, now I've got a lawyer after me, all kinds of bad things. Or I could use local and localize it and say, well, yes, I did crash this plane. However, I'm in good health.